question is on Rick Bright. The president said yesterday that he probably should not be working in federal government anymore, but he is now expected to start his new job next week. Does the president still welcome him starting that new position? And can you clarify exactly what that job is?
Well, it's interesting to ask about whether Rick Bright should start in a position, because Rick Bright hasn't showed up for a position. He was transferred to lead a bold new $1 billion testing program. He's not yet shown up for work. He takes a $285,000 salary. That's extraordinary for a federal government salary. And he is still on taxpayer-funded medical leave, so he can work with partisan attorneys to malign this president. So Mr. Bright, he should perhaps show up for the job that he currently has.
But then how come on January 2020, the stockpile was as low as it was on supplies like face masks, like N95s?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really important question, and perhaps I should redirect your question to President Obama, who left the stockpile empty, and there was a USA Today fact check of that. He left the cupboards bare, as the president noted, and USA Today said there's no indication that the Obama administration took significant steps to replenish the supply of N95 masks in the strategic national stockpile after it was depleted from repeated crises. So at the H1N1, it was full. At the end of H1N1, it was empty, and President Obama left it empty and took President Trump to refill it.
But your national biodefense strategy came out in September 2018, and the president has been now in office for over three years at this point.
Yeah, well, we refilled that stockpile. We got the N95 masks out. Ventilators, another good example. Not a single American died for lack of a ventilator. 100,000 ventilators in 100 days, 3 times what is produced in the average year, 3 times the amount of N95 respirators our healthcare industry uses. We have delivered. We cleaned up the mess that was very clearly left by President Obama, and we got that out. And I would also note, in terms of fixing the stockpile, it's also fixing domestic supply chains. That was very important. And President Trump is the first president, in my knowledge, that has really, to this degree, took on that systemic fix. Yes.
Switching gears for just a moment, also in his interview with Maria Bartiromo the other day, the president suggested that people should be jailed for what he said earlier in the week was a very obvious crime. You're an attorney and the president's spokesperson. Perhaps you could lay out the elements of this crime. What crime was committed, and in what way?
I assume you're referring to the Obama administration and the unmasking and...
The president calls Obamagate. What is it? What are the elements of that crime?
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked, because there hasn't been a lot of journalistic curiosity on this front, and I'm very glad that you asked this question. Look, there were a number of questions raised by the actions of the Obama administration. The Steele dossier, funded by the Democratic National Committee, the opposition political party to the president, was used to attain FISA warrants to listen in on conversations of people within the Trump campaign. There was the unmasking the identity of Michael Flynn, and we know that in a January 5th meeting in the Oval Office with President Obama, Sally Yates from the Department of Justice learned about the unmasking, not from the Department of Justice or from the FBI. She learned about it from President Obama and was stunned and could barely process what she was hearing at the time, because she was stunned of his knowledge of that. We know that there was a lot of wrongdoing in the case of Michael Flynn. The FBI notes, for instance, that said, should we, quote, get him to lie, as they pontificated their strategy. We know that the identity of this 3-decade general was leaked to the press, a criminal leak to the press of his identity in violation of his Fourth Amendment rights. These are very serious questions. They've been ignored by the media for far too long, and I'm very glad that I think that is the second question that I have fielded on Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, because justice does matter. Those questions, they matter.
You mentioned one thing you said was criminal, and that was what?
The one thing that I've said that was criminal?
Right.
The leaking of his name and the very real questions that have been raised. But if you want to start talking about wrongdoing in the administration, happy to go through Andy McCabe leaking to the Wall Street Journal and then lying about it. Happy to talk about James Clapper lying before Congress, saying the NSA does not monitor phone calls. That was an inaccuracy, to say the least, if not a lie. And John Brennan telling Congress that the bogus Steele dossier played no role in the Russia probe, when in fact we know it did and was the basis of attaining FISA warrants. So there's a lot of mistruths there that were said, many of them under oath. So I would point you to those and the many other real questions that I hope you all will pursue.
So the president's view that those people should be jailed, the people you just mentioned.
I never said that. Those are your words, not mine. But perhaps you should look into it and get me some answers. That is, after all, the job. That is, after all, the job of reporters, to answer the very questions that I've laid out, and I hope you guys will take the time to do it. And I also find it interesting, if we want to start talking about fabrication of crimes, we can litigate that case pretty publicly with James Clapper, who said what President Trump did with Russia pales, that Watergate paled in comparison. We can talk about Eric Swalwell lying and saying President Trump was working on behalf of the Russians. We can talk about Hakeem Jeffries lying and saying the president was a Russian asset. We can talk about Schiff saying there was ample evidence of collusion in plain sight when in fact there was not. We can talk about Mark Warner saying there's enormous amounts of evidence of collusion. We can talk about a CNN historian who said there was a smell of treason in the Trump-Russia probe when in fact for 3 years you all talked about collusion and there was none. And it was a huge injustice, not just to this administration, but to the American people who deserve truth, not the alleging of absolutely false allegations against this president. Yes.
Thank you, Kayleigh. So the president has called for transparency in the what he calls Obamagate. Is he willing to declassify the transcript that General Flynn's call to Srzok so everyone can see what was said on that call?
I've not asked him that. What I know that he would like to see right now is the lost 302. Apparently lost 302. We know 302 is a summary of an interview that the FBI did with Michael Flynn that has apparently gone missing. So we would really be quite curious to see what transpired in that 302 after the FBI pontificated, quote, getting Flynn to lie so that they could get him fired or prosecuted. Yes.
Obama. Can I ask a question about Obama's stockpile? Was there at any point any knowledge that when the transition between the Obama administration into the Trump administration, did anybody from the Obama team brief the Trump administration about the depletion of the national stockpile? At one point, the PPE maths went down to below 2%, what the national need was. Did anybody from the Obama administration warn the Trump administration going in?
It's a really good question. Not to my knowledge. To my knowledge, the two things President Obama warned about were North Korea and Michael Flynn. But what I do know is this: the Obama administration wasn't throwing ventilators into the stockpile. They were unmasking Lieutenant General Michael Flynn in the waning days of their administration.
But he did mention hopefully getting a vaccine by the new year. Is he tempering expectations of what might be possible? Is he still hoping for 100 million doses by the fall?
No, this president is not tempering expectations. In fact, I think we should be very encouraged about what we heard today from Dr. Salawi, that the early data from clinical trials for coronavirus vaccine data makes him confident that we will have a vaccine by the end of 2020. Operation Warp Speed is a great new innovative operation that I think will take us to getting a vaccine, as Dr. Salawi said, in short order. In consultation, he's doing this, of course, with the four-star General Perna is his name, and it's going to be a great effort. And I think by the fall we will see one, as has been predicted. This president wants to see one processed as fast as humanly possible, and I would note that he got us into phase 1 clinical trial faster than Dr. Fauci had ever seen in the history of his career, and that's because this president has really put the fire under the private sector and under the FDA to get 92 emergency use authorizations for testing, get to phase 1 clinical trial faster than ever before, and we can thank President Trump for being at the helm of all of this.